This election will decide whether we save the American dream or whether we allow a socialist agenda to demolish our cherished destiny. It will decide whether we rapidly create millions of high-paying jobs or whether we crush our industries and send millions of these jobs overseas, as has foolishly been done for many decades. Your vote will decide whether we protect law-abiding Americans or whether we give free rein to violent anarchists and agitators and criminals who threaten our citizens. And this election will decide whether we will defend the American way of life or whether we will allow a radical movement to completely dismantle and destroy it. That won't happen.
Our correspondent Inez Pohl is in Washington and was following Trump's speech. Inez, how is Donald Trump's nomination speech going down in America?
Well, Terry, it really depends whom you ask, right? Like the rather liberal media call it a far too long speech full of lies. And Trump's beloved broadcaster Fox News says President boosts his chances after delivering one of his best speeches. They call this a Trump big night.
To what degree, Inez, did Donald Trump use his speech to reach out to voters beyond his traditional base?
I think it was a very effective speech. He reached out to his base and just played like everything they wanted to hear, if you can say so. But he also made some remarkable, convincing points, I think, reaching out to possible swing voters when he talked about his plans, bringing back the economy, especially when he talked about how strongly he will fight China. So there were some moments which probably went down pretty well also for those who would rather have thought they will never be able to vote for Donald Trump.
Okay, now both the Democrats and the Republicans have their nominees in place. What can we expect from their campaigns as we move toward the November election now?
Right, so normally we would see many rallies, right? But because of the pandemic, this won't happen. So it's extra exciting to watch both the vice presidents or the vice president and the vice president candidate Kamala Harris and the president and Joe Biden during the debates. And it's possible that Kamala Harris will kind of beat Mike Pence, but it shall be interesting to see how Joe Biden answers to this very strong and kind of bullish President Donald Trump.
Inez, thank you very much. Good to see you. DW's Inez Pohl in Washington. Well, Donald Trump, of course, launched numerous attacks on his Democrat opponent, Joe Biden. Here's an example.
Joe Biden is not a savior of America's soul. He is the destroyer of America's jobs. And if given the chance, he will be the destroyer of American greatness. For 47 years, Joe Biden took the donations of blue-collar workers, gave them hugs and even kisses. And told them he felt their pain. And then he flew back to Washington and voted to ship our jobs to China and many other distant lands.
And joining me in the studio for some analysis is Peter Roda-Dahl from our U.S. elections team. Good to see you again, Peter. So, does Joe Biden have more reason to be concerned now?
I think the short answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, his lead has narrowed in the polls over the past weeks. And if there's one thing we've really learned over the past 4 years with Donald Trump is to never count out Trump. And he really proved that with this speech. You might even say that he acted presidential, something that we don't see all the time from Trump, you know, as a father who cares deeply about America and Americans. Biden's big challenge is that, you know, despite decades in Washington and being a prominent politician, the vice president, many voters say they don't really feel like they know him, what he stands for. And Trump, I think, managed to make a quite compelling case for what he stands for, right? Biden's big advantage at the same time is that Trump is often his own worst enemy. And so the big question is, how long will Trump be able to stay on message? And how long until he maybe has another meltdown on Twitter and reminds people that there's that side to him as well?
What about the message? Let's talk about the vision. What sort of vision is Trump offering for his second term as president? Is it much of the same or something new?
No, it's really a mix, I think. I mean, it's still very much America first. It's restoring law and order, as we saw. But it's also a promise to, build a more united and more just and inclusive America, and that is certainly new. And that is also a message that is directed squarely, towards black voters, I think. He promised to restore American prosperity, to create 10 million jobs within the next 10 months. He guaranteed health care, something that Republicans, you might add, have actively tried to, undo Obamacare. More than 70 attempts to repeal Obamacare. And he also, he spoke of the pandemic, absolutely. But many were looking for a clear plan, and this is what he had to offer.
To save as many lives as possible, we are focusing on the science, the facts, and the data. We are aggressively sheltering those at highest risk, especially the elderly, while allowing lower-risk Americans to safely return to work and to school. And we want to see so many of those great states be opened by Democrats. We want them to be open. They have to be open. They have to get back to work. We will have a safe and effective vaccine this year, and together we will crush the virus.
So, promising a vaccine, promising to crush the virus. What do you think, Peter? Did President Trump make a convincing case for his handling of the coronavirus crisis so far?
Well, if you take his word for it, absolutely. The problem is, the question is whether voters will buy it. The picture that he painted of how his administration has been handling this crisis does not really square with the experience that most Americans have. Trump said, for instance, that he will stick to science. Well, he's actively fought scientists within his own administration. The perfect example was his own speech. Over 1,000 guests, no social distancing, barely anyone was wearing a mask, no tests almost being done. So, he very much painted a picture of America the way that he would like it to be. The problem is he's the president, right? Many of the crises that we're facing right now in the U.S. happen on his watch. And the question is whether voters feel, despite all this, after this speech, that he's deserved the benefit of the doubt and a second chance.
Peter, thank you so much for your insights. Peter Rolle-Dahl from DW's U.S. election team.
Good to be with you. Thanks.